Hello, my name is Zack Roeder, and I'm presenting on the correlation between the desire for social status and living in low-income areas affecting today's youth. In this presentation, the idea that the desire for social status is the greatest issue facing youth living in low-income neighborhoods while having a direct correlation to delinquent acts will be discussed extensively. After an in-depth discussion of several aspects of social status, behavioral qualities often associated with youth living in low-income areas will be introduced, as well as a discussion of social disorganization. So what is social status? Social status, as defined by Oxford Dictionaries, is a person's standing or importance in relation to other people within a society. Youth growing up in low-income areas have a stronger desire for social status, increasing the likelihood of delinquent behavior. Youth living in low-income areas result in a rise in indulging in unsafe behavior in the community, taking more risk than other communities since there's an unsafe presence in the midst. A major issue affecting youth living in low-income areas is peer pressure. Peer pressure is defined as the influence of members of one's peer group. The issue of peer pressure leads many youth of low income to fall victim to crime and delinquency. There are several aspects surrounding low-income youth and peer pressure that make them vulnerable to these delinquent choices, which will be elaborated on later in this presentation. Peer pressure in low-income areas is directly related to higher risk of delinquency in the surrounding community. Youth in these areas tend to seek acceptance and validation in their relationships with their peers. The need for wanting to feel accepted can be very problematic because, as an adolescent, the desire for attention is very strong, and the will to partake in delinquent behavior is at an all-time high. A project took place involving 497 youths living in poverty over a 3-year period and showed that 73.2% of the youth took part in delinquent acts. Youth living in low-income areas are at risk for increased delinquent activity, social ties with deviant peers, and an increase in learned criminal behaviors. These factors place these individuals at an increased risk of choosing to commit criminal acts, which typically being involved with deviant peers, it is highly likely that youth in low-income areas will commit crime or illegal activity. This figure shows various different activities that youth living in low-income areas are likely to engage in. Out of the various categories, they are more likely than their counterparts to commit violent offenses. Social networks is an issue when wanting to find information on crime-related events among youth. Articles show a long history of research has indicated that low-income areas increases youth's risk-taking and delinquency. There are also reports that show there is a problem that lies within the local social networks of low-income areas. Theories have been confirmed that criminal behavior is learned within interacting with other people in these areas. Edward Sutherland's theory of differential association is used to investigate youth's interactions with others and how values, attitudes, techniques, and motives for criminal behavior are learned through these social ties. Rundown communities and neighborhoods with centralized problem of low income results in a rise of youth residents feeling the need to take risks. In these communities, youth indulge in more unsafe behavior than other communities since there is an unsafe presence in the midst. Youth all around the United States of America in low-income areas are at risk of becoming extremely susceptible to either becoming a criminal or being a victim of one. Adolescents residing in the United States are responsible for approximately 1/3 of all police arrests. During the 1990s, U.S. youth living in low-income areas was approximately at 15.3 million. The percentage of children living in poverty had remained consistent during the 1990s, but the number is steadily increasing. 45% of citizens living in low-income areas are unemployed, and these factors contribute to the incidence of juvenile delinquency and violence. There are many factors that lead youth to pursue a life of crime. The biggest factor in low-income areas is gang involvement. Delinquency is predominantly found in low-income streets of neighborhoods where a violent code of gang encourages aggression and violent criminal behavior among youth. This code within these youth is built on respect and violence among adolescent delinquents. This gives the individuals a sense of belonging and family that they may not have. There are many factors that lead youth in low-income areas to commit crime, but the most abundant is the effects of neighborhood disorder. Early studies have proposed that the correlation between neighborhood disorder and violence is directly related to one another. Some research suggested that the relationship between neighborhood disorder and crime may be the biggest factor in violent arrest. The youth who commit these crimes usually don't plan on committing these crimes. They usually are out of impulse. Researchers state that neighborhood disorder was in direct correlation between acting out of impulse and adolescent delinquency. This relationship between the individual and being impulsive was proven to be higher in low-income areas. Youth living in low-income areas are affected in several ways that aid in delinquency. Social status, increased criminal behavior, and social disorganization all affect youth living in low-income areas, leading to delinquency. The way youth see themselves and the way they interact with people in their communities are significant factors on the onset of delinquency. Youth want to confide in someone, but when living in low-income areas, usually steers them toward the wrong people. Social disorganization within a community breeds violence and a way for youth to endure criminal acts.